When people hear the word light, they usually think of brightness, color, or speed, something fast, something weightless, something that doesn't quite behave like ordinary objects. That instinct is close to the truth, but it misses the role light plays in physics. Light is not treated as a material, object moving through space. It is treated as a way energy travels. And the moment you take that seriously, light stops being special in a mystical sense and starts obeying the same accounting rules as everything else. The first important point is this: light has no rest mass, but it does carry energy and momentum. Those two facts together explain nearly everything that seems strange about it. Momentum is often associated with heavy things, cars, balls, planets. But in physics, momentum depends on energy and motion, not just mass. Light moves at the fastest speed allowed by nature, and because of that, motion, its energy automatically comes with momentum. When light hits a surface and reflects, the surface experiences a force. It is small, but it is real. Instruments measure it. Spacecraft designs account for it. Something without mass can still push. This already tells us something important about mass itself. Mass is not simply how much stuff there is. In physics, mass measures resistance to acceleration and how strongly something interacts with gravity. Light cannot slow down or speed up. So resistance to acceleration doesn't apply to it in the usual way, but gravity still affects light. Light bends when it passes near massive objects. Stars and galaxies change its path. This happens not because light secretly has mass, but because gravity is not just a pull on mass. Gravity describes how space and time are shaped, and anything that moves through space and time follows that shape, light included. That leads to a deeper connection. Mass and light are not opposites. They are different ways. Energy shows up. Mass is energy arranged in a form that can remain at rest. Light is energy that cannot stop moving. When matter emits light, it loses a tiny amount of mass. When matter absorbs light, it gains a tiny amount of mass. This is not a metaphor. It is a measurable effect predicted by physics and confirmed by experiment. The amounts are usually too small to notice, but the exchange is exact. Seen this way, light becomes easier to talk about. It is energy moving freely with no option to slow down, and mass becomes energy arranged in a form that can stay put. Both follow the same rules. They differ, not in nature, but in how that energy is allowed to behave and accepting that. Mass and light are both ways energy exists naturally leads to a more basic question. What is light itself? At the most fundamental level, most people start with an intuitive picture. Light feels like something that travels from place to place, almost like an invisible stream. That picture works well enough to RN on a lamp or aim a flashlight, but physics needs something sharper. In physics, light is not defined by brightness or color. Those are experiences produced by our eyes. Light is defined as an electromagnetic disturbance that carries energy and momentum through space. That phrase sounds abstract, so it helps to ground it in something familiar. Think about a lake. If you drop a stone into water, nothing travels from the center of the splash to the shore. The water itself mostly stays where it is. What moves outward is the disturbance, the changing height of the surface. Light behaves in a similar way, except the surface is the electromagnetic field, and the disturbance moves through space. Space in physics is filled with electromagnetic fields. These fields are not made of material. They are properties assigned to every location, just as temperature can have a value. Everywhere in a room, electric and magnetic fields have values everywhere. In space, light appears when these field values change over time in a linked way. A changing electric field produces a magnetic field. A changing magnetic field produces an electric field. Those changes sustain each other and propagate forward. That traveling pattern is light. Nothing physical is being carried along like a thrown object. What moves is the change itself. This already challenges common sense. Every day Experience trains us to expect motion to, involve objects. Light forces physics to, deal with motion without transport of, matter. That is why light does not need a medium. Sound needs air because sound is motion of air molecules. Light is motion of fields, and the fields are already present everywhere. Now, intuition usually pushes back at this point and says, fine, but light still feels like a particle. That instinct is not wrong, but it needs refining. Light is often described in terms of photons. A photon is not a tiny glowing bead flying through space. A photon is the smallest unit of electromagnetic energy that can be exchanged. It becomes relevant when light interacts with matter. A famous experiment makes this unavoidable. The photoelectric effect. When light shines on a metal surface, electrons can be ejected. Classical intuition predicts that brighter light should knock electrons out more easily, regardless of color. That prediction fails. Experiments show that if the light's frequency is too low, no electrons come out at all. No matter how intense the light is, increase the frequency past a threshold, and the electrons appear immediately, even at low brightness. This behavior makes sense only if light transfers energy in discrete packets. Each photon carries a specific amount of energy set by its frequency. If that energy is too small, no amount of piling photons together helps. Common sense expects gradual buildup. Nature does not allow it here. That experiment forces a conclusion. Light behaves as packets of energy during G interaction, but light also spreads, bends, and interferes. Behaviors that match waves. The same phenomenon shows wave behavior during travel and particle behavior during exchange. That is not contradiction. It is a limitation of everyday categories. At a deeper level, light is described as a quantized excitation of the electromagnetic field. The field can only change by certain allowed amounts. Light corresponds to those allowed. Changes moving through space. Now mass enters the picture again. Mass appears when energy becomes locked into arrangements that can persist. Electrons bound to nuclei, fields tied together, motion constrained. That trapped energy behaves as mass. Light represents energy that is not trapped. This explains why light has no rest mass. Rest mass is defined as energy present when an object is not moving. Light cannot meet that condition. There is no reference frame in which light stands still. The idea of rest simply does not apply. Because of that, light always travels at the same speed, not because it is pushed and not because it chooses that speed, but because electromagnetic field equations permit only one speed for self-propagating disturbances. That speed is built into space and time. This challenges another intuition. Speed usually depends on how hard something is thrown. Light ignores that rule entirely. This is also why light defines the maximum speed anything can have. Objects with mass must be able to slow down or stop. Light cannot. That difference separates matter from radiation. Color now fits naturally. Color corresponds to the frequency of the electromagnetic oscillation. Higher frequency means higher energy per photon. Lower frequency means lower energy per photon. The energy of light is tied directly to how rapidly the field changes. This explains why ultraviolet light can damage cells while radio waves cannot, even if the radio waves deliver more total energy. Each ultraviolet photon carries enough energy to alter chemical bonds. Radio photons do not. Common sense expects total power to matter most. Physics shows that how energy is packaged matters just as much. Another famous example reinforces this. Gravitational lensing. Light bends as it passes near massive objects, not because light has mass, but because gravity shapes space and time. Light follows that shape because it always follows the geometry of space-time. Photographs of distant galaxies walked by gravity confirm this behavior directly. Light responds to gravity even, without mass. That fact forces physics to abandon the idea that gravity is simply a pull between masses. It is something deeper. Light can push because momentum comes with energy and motion. Light bends because space-time guides all. Energy, light carries information because fields can vary and organize. Ways, light heats objects because energy. Transfer alters atomic motion. No. Special rules are required just light. It follows the same accounting as everything else. Light is energy in its most mobile form. It cannot remain still, cannot gather into stable structures, cannot pause. Mass is energy, arranged in forms able to persist. Both arise from the same underlying quantity, governed by the same rules, behaving differently because the universe permits them. Understanding light this way removes mystery without removing wonder. It becomes one of the cleanest examples physics offers of how energy, mass, space, and time belong to a single, connected system. At this point, light stops being just something that lets us see and starts becoming a guide to how reality is organized, because light does more than move energy. It sets limits, it defines connections, it tells space and time how they are allowed to behave. One of the most surprising consequences is this: light determines what can influence what in everyday thinking, cause and effect. Feels simple. Something happens then. Something else responds. Distance just means delay. Farther away means later. That intuition works well for walking across a room or throwing a ball. Light exposes where that intuition breaks. Nothing that carries energy or information can act faster than light, not because light is special in a sentimental way, but because it represents the fastest way any physical influence can move through space and time. Light draws the boundary between what can be causally connected and what cannot. This has a concrete meaning. An event can only affect another event if light has time to travel between them. If it cannot, then no physical signal, no force, no message can bridge that gap. This limit is not about technology or engineering. It is built into how electromagnetic fields in space behave. That boundary shapes the structure of time itself. Events are not simply ordered by before and after in an absolute sense. For distant events, the order can depend on motion. What remains fixed is causality, whether one event can influence another. Light sets that rule. This is why light sits at the center of relativity without being introduced as an extra idea. Relativity does not say light is special, so everything must obey it. It says the rules of space and time are such that light emerges as the universal speed, that everything agrees on. Common sense expects time and space too exist first with light moving inside. Them, physics finds the opposite. Light reveals how space and time are stitched together. Another implication follows directly from this. Because light carries energy and momentum but has no rest mass, it shows that mass is not the fundamental currency of physics. Energy is, mass is. One way energy can appear, light is another. This relationship is captured exactly in the connection between mass and energy. When matter emits light, its mass decreases. When matter absorbs light, its mass increases. This is no Tian analogy. It is a measurable fact. Nuclear reactions make this visible on large scales, but the same exchange happens whenever light is involved even. In ordinary processes, this forces a revision of how substance is understood. Objects feel solid, permanent, self-contained. Light feels fleeting. Physics shows that both are arrangements of the same underlying quantity. The difference is not what they are made of, but how long the arrangement can last. This leads to a result that feels strange at first. Empty space filled with light has inertia. A box filled with light weighs more than the same box without it. The difference is tiny, but it exists. Energy contributes to gravity, regardless of whether it appears as mass or radiation. That result is not intuitive. Common sense expects weight to come from matter. Light refuses to cooperate with that expectation. Another deep consequence appears when information enters the discussion. Light is the primary way information moves through the universe. Every image, every signal, every measurement relies on light or electromagnetic radiation in some form. That is not an accident. It follows from the fact that electromagnetic fields can change in structured ways and carry those changes across space. This means information is physical. It is not abstract. It has energy costs. Sending a message requires energy. Detecting a signal requires energy. Even learning something leaves physical traces in matter. Light connects information to energy in a way that cannot be separated. This connection also explains why observation matters so much in physics. To observe something is to exchange energy and information. Light is almost always involved. Observation is not passive. It is an interaction governed by the same rules. As everything else, this removes a common misunderstanding. Physics does not say reality depends on human awareness. It says reality depends on physical interaction. Light makes those interactions possible. Across distance, there is also a deeper unity hiding. Here, light obeys quantum rules when exchanging energy. It obeys relativistic rules when moving through space-semi. It obeys classical rules when large numbers of photons act together. The same entity connects three major frameworks of physics without changing identity. That alone is remarkable. Many ideas in physics appear to belong to one domain or another. Light refuses to stay confined. It forces theories to agree with one another or be discarded. Any serious description of nature must make room for light behaving consistently across scales. This makes light less like a topic and more like a test. If a theory mishandles light, something is wrong. Finally, there is a conceptual implication that is easy to miss. Light shows that the universe is not built from objects alone. It is built from relationships, constraints, and allowed motions. Light is not a thing traveling through space so much as away space and time allow energy to move. That idea changes what existence means in physics. To exist is not only to occupy space. It is to participate in the rules that govern change. Light participates fully. It carries energy, momentum, information, and influence. It connects distant regions of the universe while obeying strict limits. It reveals that those limits are not obstacles, but the structure itself. Seen this way, light is not mysterious. It is honest. It tells us exactly how far causes can reach, how energy can travel, and how space and time cooperate to make events possible at all. Understanding light deeply is less about learning new facts and more about accepting that the universe is organized by rules that feel unfamiliar yet remain consistent everywhere. So after all of this, it's worth asking, what picture of the world actually remains when the details settle? Light in physics is not a special case and not an exception. It is a reference point. It shows how energy behaves when it is free to move, how space and time respond to that motion, and how limits arise naturally from the structure of the laws themselves. What we know with confidence is this: light is an excitation of the electromagnetic field. It carries energy and momentum. It always moves at the same speed because the equations that describe the field allow no alternative. It has no rest mass, yet it responds to gravity because gravity governs space-semi, not just matter. It transfers energy in discrete units during interaction, which explains experiments that classical intuition could not. These statements are not speculative. They are supported by measurement, technology, and repeated observation. We also know that mass and light are not separate categories of substance. They are different behaviors of energy. Mass corresponds to energy arranged in forms that can persist. Light corresponds to energy that cannot be held still. Both contribute to gravity. Both obey conservation laws. Both belong to the same accounting system. From this, a coherent worldview emerges. The universe is not primarily built from objects. It is built from fields, energy, and constraints on how change is allowed to. Objects appear when energy becomes organized in ways that last. Light appears when energy moves freely through. Fields, space, and time are not passive. backgrounds but active parts of the system determining how motion and influence are permitted. This worldview removes several common misunderstandings. Light does not travel through nothing. It propagates through fields that are already present everywhere. Light does not behave strangely. It behaves consistently under rules that differ from everyday experience. Light does not blur physics. It forces precision. It also clarifies what we do not yet know. We do not know why the electromagnetic field exists in the form it does. We do not know why the constants that determine the speed of light have the values they do. We do not yet have a complete theory that unifies light's quantum behavior with gravity at the smallest scales. These are active areas of research, not settled matters. But the gaps are bounded. They do not undermine what has already been established any deeper. Theory must still reproduce the behavior of light exactly as observed. The rules light follows are not optional features of reality. They are constraints any explanation must satisfy. That is an important distinction.
When people hear space and time, they usually picture two separate ideas. Space feels like the stage where things sit. Time feels like the clock that ticks while things happen. That picture works well for daily life, and it feels natural because experience trains us to think that way. Physics began with the same picture. Early scientists treated space as a fixed grid and time as a universal rhythm. Events took place somewhere, and they happened at some moment. The two ideas stayed politely separate, like coordinates written in different columns. Then careful measurement started to whisper that something deeper was going on. Light turned out to behave in a very peculiar way. No matter how fast an observer moved, light always traveled at the same speed. Walking toward a beam, chasing it in a rocket, standing still on Earth, every measurement agreed. That single fact forced a quiet revolution, because speed connects distance and duration. If the speed of light stays fixed, then distance and duration can no longer stay independent. Space and time began to lean into each other. Imagine describing an event. A flash appears, a bell rings, a particle decays. To locate that event, one must give both a position and a moment. Physics discovered that these two pieces of information blend together in a precise way. Change the motion of the observer, and the split between distance and duration changes, while the combined description stays consistent. That combined description receives a single name: space-time. Space-time treats every event as a point with 4 numbers attached to it. 3 describe where, 1 describes when. The surprising part lies in how these numbers relate. Different observers may disagree about distances and durations, yet they agree about the space-time separation between events. Something deeper than space alone, or time alone, holds everything together. This explains effects that once sounded like paradoxes. Moving clocks tick differently. Lengths measured along the direction of motion change. None of this comes from faulty instruments or strange materials. It comes from space-time itself, assigning different slices of distance and duration to different observers. A useful way to picture it involves paths. Every object traces a path through space-time, called a world line. Standing still in space still means motion through time. Moving faster through space tilts that path, trading some motion through time for motion through space. All objects move through space-time. They simply choose different directions within it. This single idea replaces many separate rules. Instead of asking how space behaves and how time behaves, physics asks how space-time behaves. Motion, light, cause and effect all follow from that geometry. Once this viewpoint settles in, the universe begins to look less like a stage with actors and more like a woven fabric where events, motion, and measurement share the same structure. The fabric keeps its own order, quietly guiding everything that happens within it. Once that idea settles in, another shift follows almost automatically. Motion stops being something measured against a fixed background. Instead, motion becomes a comparison between different paths through space-time. Two observers moving differently are not arguing about reality. They are slicing the same space-time in different ways. This is where time stops being universal. There is no single master clock ticking for the entire universe. Each object carries its own time along its path. A wristwatch measures how much space-time that particular path passes through. That amount is called proper time, and it belongs to the object itself. Two observers can separate, move differently, reunite, and honestly report different elapsed times without contradiction. Space-time allows it. This sounds strange only because everyday speeds hide the effect. At human scales, the differences are tiny. At higher speeds, they grow. At the speed of light, something remarkable happens. Time along that path stops entirely. For light, there is no passage of time between emission and absorption. That fact is not poetic. It falls straight out of space-time geometry. Light traces the boundary structure of space-time. It marks the limit of cause and effect. Events outside that boundary cannot influence each other, not because of technological limits, but because space-time itself does not connect them in the right way. Cause and effect are not rules imposed afterward. They are built into the geometry. This also explains why simultaneity loses its absolute meaning. Two events that appear simultaneous to one observer may not appear simultaneous to another. There is no single answer to what is happening right now everywhere. Each observer carries a personal slice of space-time they call the present. The universe does not privilege one slice over another. Once this is accepted, space-time stops feeling abstract and starts feeling practical. Satellites orbiting Earth experience time differently from clocks on the ground. Their paths through space-time differ, so their clocks tick at different rates. Navigation systems must correct for this or they fail. The theory does not live in textbooks. It runs quietly inside technology. Then gravity enters the story, and space-time deepens again. Instead of treating gravity as a force pulling objects together, space-time describes it as curvature. Massive objects change the geometry around them. Paths that once looked straight bend, not because something pushes them, but because straight itself has changed meaning. An object moving freely follows the straightest possible path through curved space-time. That path is called a geodesic. Falling, orbiting, drifting through space, these are all expressions of geometry, not force. Remove all other influences, and an object simply follows space-time's shape. This explains why all objects fall the same way, regardless of mass. They are not being pulled differently, they are following the same geometry. The motion comes from space-time itself. Time feels this curvature too. Clocks closer to massive objects tick more slowly than clocks farther away. Again, this is not mechanical stress or interference. It is geometry assigning different amounts of time to different paths. Space and time no longer act as separate players. They respond together. Mass and energy tell space-time how to curve. Space-time tells matter how to move. This mutual relationship replaces the older idea of forces acting across empty space. At this point, space-time begins to sound less like a background and more like an active participant. It expands, bends, stretches, and evolves. The universe does not sit inside space-time. The universe includes space-time as part of its physical content. Cosmic expansion fits naturally into this view. Galaxies move apart not because they fly through space, but because space-time itself grows between them. No central point is required. Every location sees the same pattern because the geometry itself changes. Even emptiness is no longer empty. Space-time can ripple. Gravitational waves are distortions that travel through it, carrying energy and information. Detectors on Earth measure these ripples as tiny changes in distance, smaller than atomic nuclei, yet perfectly real. Georgetown itself vibrates. At this stage, space and time stop being containers and start being relationships. Distances, durations, motion, gravity, and causality all emerge from a single structure. Learning space-time is not about memorizing effects. It is about adopting a new way to organize experience. Instead of asking where something is and when it happens as separate questions, space-time asks how events relate to one another, which events can influence which others, how much change fits along a given path, how geometry shapes possibility. Once seen this way, many puzzles lose their mystery. Slowed clocks, curved orbits, cosmic expansion, limits on signals follow from one consistent picture. Nothing special needs to be added. Nothing hidden needs to be assumed. Space-time does not explain everything, but it explains why so many things fit together so tightly. It provides a language where motion, gravity, and time speak the same grammar. Understanding that grammar makes the universe feel less strange, not because it becomes familiar, but because it becomes coherent. The fabric does not need intention or awareness. Its structure alone guides the unfolding of events, patiently and precisely, everywhere at once. Once space-time is understood as a structure rather than a stage, another quiet consequence appears. Events themselves become more important than objects. Physics stops asking what something is in isolation and starts asking how events connect. A collision, a flash of light, a heartbeat, a thought, each is an event, and space-time organizes how these events relate. This is why space-time cares so deeply about limits. There is a maximum speed, not because motion is difficult, but because space-time geometry allows only certain connections between events. Light sits at the boundary. Anything slower can be influenced by many events. Anything faster would require skipping over space-time itself. The limit is structural, not technological. This boundary shapes reality in a very practical way. It decides what can be known, what can be affected, and what can never be connected. Two events can be close in space, yet unreachable in time. Others can be distant, yet causally linked. Space-time does not measure closeness by meters or seconds alone. It measures it by whether influence can pass. This is where intuition trained by everyday life begins to soften. Distance is no longer just how far. Time is no longer just how long. Separation becomes a question of space-time intervals. Some separations allow influence, some forbid it forever. This idea alone explains why the past feels fixed and the future feels open. Events in the past sit inside the region that can influence the present. Events in the future do not yet. That difference is not psychological, it is geometric. Space-time also explains why changing the past remains impossible. It is not guarded by paradox or mystery. The geometry simply does not permit paths that loop back in the required way under ordinary conditions. The structure blocks them. At this point, space-time starts to sound rigid, almost unforgiving. Yet it also allows extraordinary freedom. Different observers carve space-time into space and time differently, and all of them are equally valid. No observer owns the correct present. Each carries a personal frame shaped by motion and gravity. This dissolves the idea of a universal now, replacing it with many consistent viewpoints layered on the same structure. That realization feels unsettling at first, but it actually simplifies things. Arguments about who is right fade away. The rules do not change, only the coordinates do. Space-time itself does not care how it is labeled. Then something deeper emerges.
Energy and momentum are not separate bookkeeping tools floating on top of space-time. They are tightly linked to its structure. Motion through space and motion through time are two sides of the same coin. Change one and the other responds. This is why energy, mass, and momentum transform together when observers move differently. Mass turns out to be concentrated energy moving mostly through time. Light turns out to be energy moving entirely through space. Everything else lies between. This is not metaphor. It is how space-time measures motion. This also explains why adding energy to a system can increase its inertia. Resistance to acceleration is not stubbornness. It is geometry reacting to energy content. Once gravity is folded into this picture, space-time becomes dynamic. It no longer sits passively while matter moves. It responds. Energy curves space-time, and curved space-time redirects energy. This feedback loop shapes stars, galaxies, and the universe itself. Black holes appear naturally here. They are not exotic monsters added by imagination. They form when space-time curvature becomes so strong that all paths tilt inward. Not even light can find a route outward. Time itself points toward the center. Near such regions, time slows dramatically relative to distant observers. This is not an illusion. Different paths through space-time accumulate different amounts of time. Clocks tell the truth locally, even when they disagree globally. At large scales, space-time stretches. The expansion of the universe is not matter racing away from a center. It is geometry evolving. Distances grow because the metric itself changes. This allows galaxies to separate faster than light without breaking any rules, because no object outruns light locally. The space between them grows. This distinction matters. It prevents confusion. Motion through space-time and change of space-time are different processes. Both are allowed. Both are measured. Space-time also stores memory. Gravitational waves carry information about violent events long after they occur. When two massive objects merge, space-time rings like a struck bell. Detectors sense these vibrations as tiny shifts in distance. Geometry itself becomes observable. At this stage, space-time stops being abstract. It acquires physical consequences that can be touched, measured, and engineered around. And yet, space-time remains subtle. It does not tell objects where to go. It defines what paths are available. Objects follow those paths not by choice, but because no alternatives exist. This removes the need for invisible forces reaching across emptiness. Motion becomes local and natural. This perspective also clarifies why space-time feels smooth at large scales and uncertain at small ones. On everyday scales, geometry averages out. On extreme scales, quantum effects begin to stir. How space-time behaves when those effects dominate remains one of the great open questions. Still, even without that final answer, space-time already provides a powerful unifying language. It ties together motion, gravity, light, causality, and time into one coherent structure. It replaces many separate rules with a single geometric idea. Learning space-time is not about visualizing four dimensions perfectly. It is about recognizing that space and time are aspects of one system that cannot be pulled apart without breaking consistency. Once that recognition settles in, explanations become easier. Effects stop piling up as disconnected surprises. They line up as consequences of structure. Space-time does not explain everything. It does not explain why the universe exists, or why its rules take the form they do. But it explains how those rules fit together once they exist.
And that is enough to speak about it clearly, to teach it honestly, and to carry the idea forward without mystery or exaggeration. It becomes a way to talk about reality that is restrained, precise, and surprisingly intuitive once the old separations are allowed to fade. At this point, space-time can be treated as a working framework rather than a surprising idea. It becomes a practical tool for organizing physical laws. Instead of memorizing separate rules for motion, gravity, and light, everything fits into a single structure governed by geometry. The key fact to hold on to is this: space-time provides the measuring system for all physical processes. Distances, durations, speeds, energies, and causal relationships are all defined within it. When physics predicts something correctly, it does so because the space-time description remains consistent across situations. This consistency shows up in equations, but it also shows up in experiments. Atomic clocks flown on airplanes return with measurable time differences. Signals from distant spacecraft arrive exactly when space-time predicts they should. Light bends around massive objects by amounts that match curvature calculations precisely. None of these effects rely on interpretation. They are measurements checked repeatedly. Space-time also explains why certain quantities are conserved. Momentum, energy, and angular momentum remain stable because space-time itself has uniform properties. When space looks the same in every direction, momentum is conserved. When time flows uniformly, energy is conserved. These are not coincidences. They are consequences of geometry. This connection makes space-time central to modern physics. Any new theory must respect it or explain why it changes. This applies to particle physics, cosmology, and attempts to unify gravity with quantum mechanics. Even speculative ideas begin by asking how space-time behaves. Importantly, space-time does not remove everyday intuition, it refines it. At low speeds and weak gravity, space-time reduces smoothly to familiar rules. Classical mechanics appears as an approximation, not an error. This explains why earlier physics worked so well before deeper structure was discovered. Space-time also clarifies limits. Faster-than-light communication fails not because of engineering difficulty, but because space-time geometry blocks causal connections. Absolute simultaneity fails, not because clocks malfunction, but because space-time allows multiple consistent time orderings. These limits are not flaws, they are features that keep physical laws coherent. When teaching space-time to others, the goal is not to force visualization of 4 dimensions. The goal is to communicate relationships. Events relate through space-time intervals. Paths accumulate time differently. Geometry guides motion. Once these ideas are in place, most effects feel expected rather than strange. At the same time, space-time remains incomplete. On very small scales, quantum effects become important, and the smooth geometric picture may break down. How space-time behaves under those conditions is still under investigation. Current theories work extremely well within their tested range, but they are not final. That uncertainty does not weaken space-time's role. It shows its importance. Any deeper theory must recover space-time behavior where experiments confirm it. This requirement narrows possibilities and guides progress. In practice, space-time acts as the backbone of modern physics. It connects experiments on Earth with observations of distant galaxies. It links clocks, rulers, particles, and fields into a single language. It explains why different observers can disagree locally while agreeing globally. Understanding space-time well enough to explain it to others means being able to describe what stays the same when perspectives change. Distances and times vary. Space-time relationships do not. Forces can be reinterpreted. Geometry remains. Measurements differ. Structure persists. That reliability is what makes space-time useful. It allows prediction without appeal to hidden mechanisms. It replaces separate explanations with one consistent framework. Once that framework is clear, space and time stop feeling like separate ingredients of reality. They become aspects of a single system that organizes all physical change. And with that understanding, discussions of motion, gravity, light, and causality naturally fall into place using one shared set of ideas rather than many disconnected ones.
What I'm about to reveal could be the difference between an ordinary life and an extraordinary one. There are 6 lessons that can turn any mind into a machine that learns fast, thinks clearly, and achieves the impossible. These aren't tricks. They're codes the greatest geniuses used to see what others couldn't. Those who master these lessons truly learn, craft solutions that change everything, and reach levels that once seemed out of reach. Pay close attention now. These 6 lessons aren't just knowledge. They are the key to unlocking your mind and completely changing your destiny. Lesson 1. Curiosity is the key to success. Stop everything and pay attention. Everything you've achieved so far, from your very first words to your most important victories, was born from a single impulse: curiosity. Curiosity is the spark that has moved humanity since the beginning of history. It pulled us out of caves, helped us master fire, led us to create language, science, and technology, and even to explore space. What brought us here was curiosity, a natural talent we all carry within us, but many allow to fall asleep. Here's the key. While most people are satisfied to accept things as they are, the curious ask why. That's how Thomas Edison, standing in the dark, refused to believe the world was meant to live by candlelight and asked, "What if I could create a controlled light?" And that's how another thinker looked up at the sky and refused to accept the simple idea that time and space were fixed. He asked, "What if time could bend? What if the speed of light is the key that connects everything in the universe?" From that boldness came the theory of relativity, one of the most revolutionary discoveries in history, redefining what we thought we knew about reality.
Do you see the power in this? While millions go through life repeating ready-made truths, a few dare to question. Lose your curiosity, and you lose your future. Because curiosity keeps your mind young, alive, restless, and ready to find paths others can't see. Curiosity is more valuable than any diploma, more powerful than any talent, and rarer than any resource. It is the fuel of great innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders. Let today be a turning point. Never again allow your curiosity to be smothered by routine, fear, or the opinions of others. From now on, instead of accepting ready-made answers, choose to question, no matter how silly the questions seem. Don't stay silent in the face of doubt. Dare to ask. The curious don't just learn more, they live more, achieve more, and build a life that seems impossible to those who lost the ability to ask. Lesson 2. The secret is thinking differently from the crowd. Pay close attention now, because you're about to hear something no one ever told. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room to stand out. You don't need to memorize more information, have the highest IQ, or master every detail. If you simply learn to think differently from the majority, you already have a massive. The world is full of talented people who stay average because they think like everyone else. But those who dare to look from another angle, question what seems obvious, and choose their own path, those are the ones who rise. There are thousands of people studying every day, going to college, collecting diplomas, trying to outthink others to secure a better future. And yet, an ordinary person without titles or status can have the courage to create something that doesn't exist yet. And suddenly, that person becomes more valuable than all the scholars combined.
Power doesn't come only from the knowledge you accumulate, but from the vision to give the world what it does not yet have. That's how inventors, entrepreneurs, and creators change the game. Not by being the most technically intelligent, but by daring to think differently. Here is the real secret. Thinking differently doesn't require genius. It requires courage. Courage to reject ready-made answers. Courage to go against the crowd. Courage to look strange or even wrong for a while. That's why innovators, entrepreneurs, and visionaries stand out. They dared to think where others wouldn't. Now, here's something that can change your life. Train your mind every day to flip common logic. When everyone says, "It can't be done," ask, "How can it be done?" When everyone goes right, ask, "What's on the left?" When everyone sees a problem, ask, "Where is the opportunity?" This ability, more than intelligence, more than talent, is what separates those who follow the crowd from those who create their own destiny. Lesson 3. Turn mistakes into learning. Pay close attention. A mistake is a master in disguise. Most people run from it as if it were proof of failure, but true winners embrace it as an endless source of wisdom. Every time you make a mistake, life is handing you a clue, a map of where not to go, how to improve, how to refine. The electric light, which seems obvious today, was born from thousands of failed attempts. Its inventor famously said, "I have not failed 1,000 times. I've simply found 1,000 ways that don't work." That mindset is the difference between those who quit and those who conquer. Here's a powerful secret. Mistakes accelerate learning far more than successes do. Getting it right reinforces what you already know. Getting it wrong reveals what you didn't know. It's like a lens that shows, with clarity, exactly where you need to grow. Those who have the courage to fail fast and learn fast always surpass those who try to live without failing. Now think about your own life. How many times have you blamed yourself for a mistake?
What if, instead, you started seeing each failure as a lab, a controlled experiment that becomes the foundation for a stronger next step? Never again treat a failure as the end. Treat it as the beginning of something greater. A mistake is simply life saying, "Not this way. There's another path." If you have the courage to listen, you'll discover that every stumble is actually an invitation to rise higher. Lesson 4. Talk to yourself to learn. Explain to learn. If you truly want to master any subject, reading, listening, or memorizing isn't enough. The secret is to explain. The human mind works in a fascinating way. When you try to explain something out loud, even to yourself, it's forced to organize ideas, fill in gaps, and simplify concepts. In that process, learning becomes real clarity. The smartest people aren't the ones who memorize facts. They're the ones who can convey an idea so clearly that even a child understands it. If you can't explain it simply, you haven't truly understood it. That is the ultimate proof of learning. Here's something that can change your life. Make this a daily discipline. Whenever you learn something new, stop and explain it out loud as if you were teaching someone who has never heard of it. If clarity is missing, go back and study again until you can simplify. Do this consistently, and before long, your mind will become sharp like a blade, able to cut any confusion into pieces. While most people fool themselves into thinking they've learned because they can recite information by heart, you'll be different. Someone who understands, masters, and applies. Explain to learn, and the world will notice the difference in how you speak, decide, and solve problems. Lesson 5. Simplify to the essence. The true test of intelligence isn't to complicate, it's to simplify. If you really want to learn anything, you must master the art of simplicity. Most people make the mistake of thinking knowledge means piling up fancy words, memorizing technical terms, or repeating complex phrases. That isn't intelligence, that's vanity. Real intelligence is taking something complex and reducing it to its essential core. Use this test every time you learn something new. If I had to explain this to a 10-year-old, how would I do it? If you can't answer, you don't understand it yet. The confusion is in your mind, and simplicity is the tool that clears the excess. Think of history's great breakthroughs. Gravity expressed in a short formula. Evolution captured in a single idea. The best adapted survive. Even the world's biggest businesses can be described in a simple sentence. Connect people. What does this prove? When you reach the essence, you own the knowledge. Understand this. Simplifying isn't making it shallow. Simplifying is digging deeper until you find the solid bedrock that supports everything else. That's where your mind gains clarity, and where you prove to yourself that you've truly learned. Make it a daily practice. Take any subject and boil it down to a few words. If you can't, go back and study until you can. This habit will change how you think, speak, and act. People who explain with clarity are heard. Those who speak simply are remembered. Those who deliver essence are followed. While most try to look smart by complicating, you'll be different. The person who illuminates, resolves, and teaches. And that ability will make your mind stand out anywhere in the world. Lesson 6. The beauty of life's simplicity. True greatness isn't in accumulation. It's in seeing the beauty of the essential. Imagine this. A life where you don't need to prove anything to anyone. Where you're not trapped by comparisons or the frantic race of the crowd. That's where true peace lives. Not in knowing everything, not in achieving everything, but in valuing what truly matters. The greatest sages and thinkers in history shared one thing. They saw greatness in simple things. They were moved by a flower, by the movement of the stars, by the way a child asks questions. They knew life doesn't need to be complicated to be grand. The simpler you live, the more room you create for happiness. Simplify your thoughts, your goals, your routine. It's not about having less, it's about being more present, more grateful, more aware. That's how you find peace. That's how you find strength. That's how you find abundance. Now, make your commitment public. Comment below, I choose to master my mind. That's the mark of someone who will no longer get lost in excess. Someone ready to focus on the essential and build an extraordinary life. If this message resonated with you, like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. From here on out, every lesson you hear will be another tool to strengthen your mind, unlock your potential, and transform your life. Remember, real power isn't in knowing everything.
Think about the last time you learned something that you couldn't unlearn. Maybe it was understanding why the sky is blue, or realizing that every tree you see was once a tiny seed, or grasping why ice floats on water. Once you understood it, really understood it, you couldn't go back to not knowing. The interesting thing is, that's not just a figure of speech. Your brain, physically, isn't the same as it was before. And right now, as these words reach you, something similar is happening. Let's start with something straightforward. Your brain is made of about 86 billion neurons. Now, that number is thrown around a lot. But what does it actually mean? Each of those neurons connects to thousands of others, creating something like 100 trillion connections. These connections, called synapses, are where the interesting stuff happens. They're not static. They're changing all the time, strengthening when they're used, weakening when they're ignored, even creating entirely new pathways. Here's where it gets fascinating. Every time you understand something new, you're literally rewiring these connections. It's not a metaphor. Scientists can measure this. When someone learns to juggle, for instance, scans show increased gray matter in areas of the brain that handle visual and motor coordination. Stop juggling for a few months, and those changes start to fade. The brain is constantly sculpting itself based on what it does. But understanding something, really grasping a concept, does something different than just learning a skill. It creates what we might call an irreversible shift. Think about optical illusions. Take one of those images that looks like a vase until someone points out it's also two faces looking at each other. The moment you see both, you can't unsee them. Your brain has created a new pattern of recognition. The visual information hasn't changed, but your internal model of what you're looking at has expanded. This happens because of how the brain processes information. It's not like a computer that stores data in neat files. Instead, it creates models, patterns of expectation about how the world works. When you encounter something new, the brain doesn't just record it. It tries to fit it into existing patterns. If it doesn't fit, the brain has to do something harder. It has to restructure those patterns. That restructuring is what we experience as understanding. Let's use a simple example. Imagine you've never thought about why ships float. You might have a vague sense that they just do, maybe because they're shaped right or made of the right materials. But then someone explains displacement. The ship pushes water out of the way, and if the weight of that displaced water is more than the weight of the ship floats. Suddenly, you understand not just ships, but why a steel needle sinks but a steel ship floats, why you feel lighter in a pool, why icebergs are dangerous below the surface. One principle unlocks dozens of phenomena. That moment of understanding involves several things happening in the brain at once. First, there's pattern completion. Different parts of the brain that handle different aspects of the concept, visual, logical, spatial, start firing in sync. This synchronized activity strengthens the connections between these regions. Second, there's prediction. Once you understand displacement, your brain starts automatically predicting what will happen in similar situations. See a rock? It'll sink. See a log? Might float. Depends on the wood. This prediction mechanism is constantly running in the background, refining your model. But here's what makes certain insights special. They change the questions you ask. Before understanding displacement, you might wonder about specific cases. Why does this float? Why does that sink? After understanding, you start asking different questions. What determines density? How do submarines control their depth? The insight opens up new territory to explore. This is why some ideas are called generative. They don't just answer questions, they generate new ones. There's a deeper layer to this. Some concepts change not just what you know, but how you perceive. Consider the idea that everything you see is actually in the past. Light takes time to travel, so when you look at something across the room, you're seeing it as it was a few nanoseconds ago. Look at the sun, and you're seeing it as it was 8 minutes ago. Look at a distant star, and you might be seeing light that began its journey before humans existed on Earth. This isn't just trivia. It fundamentally shifts how you think about now. It reveals that simultaneity, the idea that things happen at the same moment, is more complicated than it seems. Once you grasp this, you start noticing it everywhere. You realize that when you're having a conversation, you're responding to words that were spoken milliseconds ago. The present moment is thinner than you thought. This type of understanding doesn't just add information. It restructures your basic intuitions about reality. The brain seems to have different types of understanding. There's shallow understanding, where you can repeat information or follow steps without really grasping why. Then there's deep understanding, where you can apply the principle in new situations, explain it in different ways, and see its connections to other ideas. The difference between these isn't just how much you know, it's how integrated that knowledge is with the rest of what you know. Think about learning to read. At first, letters are just shapes. Then you learn that shapes correspond to sounds. Then that combinations of sounds make words. Then that words carry meaning. But something interesting happens as you practice. Eventually, you stop seeing letters at all. You just see meaning. The process becomes automatic, invisible. Try to look at a word in a language you can read and not read it. You can't. The understanding has become so integrated into your brain's processing that it's no longer optional. This automaticity is powerful, but it also means that truly understanding something changes your raw perception, not just your interpretation. A musician hearing a symphony hears things a non-musician doesn't. Not because they're thinking harder about it, but because their perceptual systems have been restructured. They've trained their brains to automatically detect patterns, harmonies, and structures that others miss. Now, here's where it connects to this moment, right now. The act of explaining how understanding changes the brain is itself changing your brain. There's a recursive quality to it. Knowing that your brain rewires itself as you learn makes you more aware of that process. And that awareness can influence how you approach learning. It's like discovering that you can feel your own heartbeat. The heart was always beating, but now you're conscious of it. And that consciousness can even affect the rhythm. Some neuroscientists talk about metacognition, thinking about thinking. Humans seem to be unusually good at this. Not only do we learn, but we can reflect on how we learn. And we can use those reflections to learn better. This creates a feedback loop. Understanding how understanding works makes you better at understanding. It's a strange loop, the kind that shows up in consciousness itself. Consider what happens when you learn that memories aren't fixed recordings. Every time you remember something, you're reconstructing it, and in that reconstruction, you can actually change the memory. This means that remembering changes what you remember. Once you know this, you start noticing it. You catch yourself being uncertain about details. You recognize when a memory feels more like a story you've told yourself than a direct experience. The knowledge changes your relationship with your own past. Or take the concept of cognitive biases. Learn about confirmation bias, the tendency to notice evidence that supports what you already believe and ignore evidence against it, and you start catching yourself doing it. Not always. The bias doesn't disappear just because you know about it. But sometimes you'll be in an argument and suddenly think, wait, am I just looking for reasons to be right? That moment of recognition is your brain using its model of itself to check its own processes. It's like having a mirror that shows you not just your face, but your expressions as they form. The brain's plasticity, this ability to rewire itself, isn't unlimited. It's easier when you're young. Children learn languages, musical instruments, and complex skills with a fluidity that adults often envy. This is because young brains are in a heightened state of plasticity. The connections are forming rapidly, and the structures are still flexible. But plasticity doesn't disappear with age. It continues throughout life. It slows down, certainly, and it takes more effort, but it's always there. People in their 70 seconds and 80 seconds can learn new languages, take up instruments, master new skills. The brain never fully stops being able to change. What does change is efficiency. Young brains are exploring, making lots of connections, trying different patterns. Adult brains are more specialized. They've kept the connections that proved useful and pruned away the ones that didn't. This specialization makes adults better at things they know, but slower at learning completely new things. It's a trade-off. You gain expertise, but lose some flexibility. But here's a curious fact. Certain types of learning seem to maintain or even increase plasticity. Learning itself might keep the brain more plastic. There's evidence that people who regularly learn new things, who keep challenging themselves with unfamiliar skills or ideas, maintain cognitive flexibility longer. The brain treated as a learning organ stays a learning organ. Use it or lose it, as the saying goes. But the use here specifically means using it for learning, not just for familiar tasks. This brings up an interesting question. What's the optimal way to structure learning if you want to genuinely understand something rather than just memorize it? The research points to a few principles. First, spacing. Learning a little bit over many sessions works better than cramming everything into one session. The brain seems to consolidate understanding during rest, particularly during sleep. When you learn something, then sleep, then come back to it, the connections have had time to stabilize. Second, retrieval. Testing yourself, trying to recall information, strengthens understanding more than just reviewing it. This is counterintuitive, because retrieval feels harder and reviewing feels easier. But that difficulty is actually the point. When you struggle to recall something, you're forcing your brain to strengthen those pathways. Easy repetition doesn't create the same effect. Third, connection. Understanding deepens when you connect new information to things you already know. This is why analogies work so well. They take something unfamiliar and link it to something familiar, creating a bridge that your brain can cross. Once the bridge exists, the new concept becomes part of your integrated knowledge network rather than an isolated fact. There's also the question of attention. Understanding requires focused attention in a way that superficial processing doesn't. This matters more now than ever because attention is increasingly fragmented. Constant interruptions, notifications, quick switches between tasks. These all interfere with the kind of sustained focus that deep understanding requires. The brain needs time to settle into a problem, to play with it, to let different regions communicate and find patterns. Interruptions break this process. But when that process works, when understanding clicks into place, there's often a feeling of satisfaction, sometimes even pleasure. This isn't just psychological. The brain releases dopamine when patterns are recognized, when predictions prove accurate, when understanding emerges. This reward system encourages learning. It's why puzzles can be addictive, why solving a difficult problem feels good, why that aha moment is pleasurable. The brain is essentially rewarding itself for getting better at modeling the world. And here's something worth sitting with. The world you experience is your brain's model of the world, not the world itself. Light hits your retinas, but you don't see the electrical signals in your optic nerve. You see objects, colors, movement. Sound waves hit your eardrums, but you don't hear vibrations. You hear words, music, meaning. The brain takes raw sensory data and constructs an experience. That experience is remarkably good at matching reality. Good enough that you usually don't notice it's a construction, but it is. This means that when you deepen your understanding of something, you're not just adding information to your mental library. You're actually changing the world as you experience it. A person who understands music theory hears music differently than someone who doesn't. A person who understands physics sees motion differently. A person who understands psychology interprets behavior differently. The external reality hasn't changed, but the experienced reality has. This is why teaching can be so powerful. When you explain something to someone else and they genuinely understand it, you've literally altered their experienced reality. You've given them a new way of seeing. And often, explaining something forces you to understand it better yourself. You have to find the right words, the right analogies, anticipate confusions. This process refines your own understanding. Teaching and learning aren't separate. They're both forms of cognitive restructuring. Now, notice what's happened during these past minutes. Various concepts have been explained. Neuroplasticity, pattern recognition, the construction of perception, the integration of knowledge. But more than that, a perspective has been offered. That understanding isn't passive reception of information, but active reconstruction of mental models. And that this reconstruction is physical, measurable, real. If this perspective makes sense, if it's clicked into place, then something has shifted. Not just new facts added to old knowledge, but a new framework for thinking about knowledge itself. This is what certain insights do. They provide not just answers, but new frameworks for generating answers. They're tools for thinking. And like any tool, once you have it, you use it automatically. You don't think, now I'll apply my understanding of displacement when you wonder whether something will float. You just know immediately. The understanding has become part of how you perceive. So when the title suggested that, after watching this, your brain won't be the same, it wasn't hyperbole. The connections that existed in your brain before these words are not identical to the connections that exist now. Some synapses have strengthened, some patterns have formed or deepened. The change might be small, might be temporary if the ideas aren't revisited, but it's there. It's measurable, in principle, if we had detailed enough scans. But beyond the immediate neural changes, there's the possibility of something more lasting. If the core idea resonates, if it becomes part of how you think about learning and understanding, then it will influence future learning. You might pay more attention to moments when understanding clicks into place. You might notice the difference between memorizing and truly grasping. You might approach difficult concepts with more patience, knowing that understanding takes time and that the brain needs to build new structures. These changes in approach could compound over time, making you more effective at learning, which makes you learn more, which makes you better at learning. Another feedback loop. There's something profound in realizing that you're always in the middle of this process. You're never finished understanding. There's no moment when your brain stops being plastic, stops rewiring itself in response to experience. Every conversation, every book, every observation is potentially changing the structure of your thoughts. Most changes are small, temporary, but some are significant. Some genuinely shift how you see everything else. And here's the curious thing about these significant shifts. You often can't fully understand them until after they've happened. Before learning that light has a speed and that means seeing is always seeing the past, you can't quite imagine what that understanding will feel like. Before grasping how memories change when remembered, you can't predict how it will change your relationship with your past. The understanding has to restructure your thinking before you can think from within that restructured framework. This means that learning, real learning, always involves a leap into something you can't fully anticipate. There's an element of trust that the confusion will resolve, that the pieces will eventually fit together, that the brain will do its work of pattern finding and integration. And usually, if you stay with it, it does. The confusion clears. Things make sense. Not all at once, usually, but gradually. And then one day you realize you understand something that once seemed impossibly complex. The brain is capable of this because it's not a fixed machine. It's a living system that shapes itself in response to the world. It's designed, if that's the right word, to learn. That's its primary function. Not storing information, though it does that. Not processing data, though it does that too. But learning, adapting, updating its models, getting better at predicting and understanding. This is what brains do. And so, having traced through these ideas, having followed the logic from synapses to perception to understanding to change. What's the takeaway? Perhaps it's this. Be conscious of what you expose your mind to, what you practice, what you think about, because all of it is shaping the organ that does the experiencing. The brain you have tomorrow will be different from the brain you have today. The only question is how it will be different and whether those differences will serve you. You're always becoming someone slightly different. The world you experience is always being reconstructed. Understanding this doesn't stop the process. Nothing can stop it. But understanding might give you some say in the direction, and that in itself changes everything.